Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Team House, the Ron Moeller Returns episode. Ron is our guest. I'm Jack Murphy. This is my co-host, Dave Park. Ron is joining us for the second episode. He has turned out to be a fan favorite. You're the VIP of the show. I think our most watched episode thus far. And I can understand why. The first one we did was fascinating. Ron served in the CIA as a paramilitary operations officer for many years, spent a lot of time in Air Branch, spent a lot of time deployed to Iraq, to Afghanistan, spent some time in the Philippines. And we really only scratched the surface, I felt like, in the last episode. So I asked Ron if he would come back again. I think some of the viewers were also very keen to see him come back for a second episode. So that's why we're here tonight. And we're going to talk quite a bit, actually, about your time in Afghanistan and Iraq and a lot of, I feel like, pivotal moments in the war that you were either present for or had a bird's eye view for it. I'm really excited to talk about all that. So, Ron, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back. The last episode was certainly educational. My son-in-law used it to help him write a paper at the SOCOM Senior NCO Academy, and he got a 100%, which I wouldn't have expected anything less. But so he certainly appreciated it, and yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Ron, that makes me so happy and so proud to hear. I mean, I'm glad that he got 100 on his paper. But beyond that, one of my hopes for this live stream, for this show, for this podcast, is that what we contribute and what our guests contribute, that this show becomes important enough that there are journalists and students and academics out there who are like, wow, this is really important information. This is an important primary source, and that they're able to quote it and use the source citations in their work. So that little story you told just makes me so happy to hear that we're early on in our lifespan, I feel like, with this show, and we're still getting started. But I hope, it's always been my hope that we're able to bring that sort of credibility to the table. So thanks for telling me that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, Ron, I was looking over and we were discussing a few bullet points, a couple different moments in your career that we were not able to get to on the first show. And I thought maybe we'd go chronologically. And also, this is interesting because you were involved in the hunt for PIFWICs, as they were called, in the Balkans back in the day. I'll let you hash out what all of that was about. But I would just point out that this story will certainly intersect with our interview with H.K. Roy, a CIA ops officer we interviewed a few episodes back, and he was present in Bosnia. He was the first station chief in Sarajevo. So I think that again, I hope that this show is interesting for viewers because you get to hear about these conflicts from different perspectives and different people and the different experiences they had. So I'm very keen to hear your point of view, Ron, and what you were doing over in that region at the time.
Well, I came into the Balkans way late. I mean, H.K. Roy had already, moved on, and the I-4 and S-4 and whatever 4 was all pretty well established. But somebody back at JSOC got a wild hair and decided it was prime time to hunt for PIFWICs. So, and PIFWICs, by the way, is this tongue-twisting acronym that stands for Persons Indicted for War Crimes. Mm-hmm. So we were going after, Slobodan Milosevic and the Radovic or whatever, I can't remember.
The one that
we were going after.
Roy was after you.
Right, yeah, all the high-hanging fruit. So it was in coordination with JSOC. So we brought over the same platform that we had used in the PI with Abu Sayyaf. Mm-hmm. And of course, Tuzla's a lot different, and Bosnia and the Balkans is a lot different flying environment. We had to stay so many kilometers away from the river that was the border of Serbia and Bosnia. So it was exciting. The mission tasking came from the military, and it was 3 months of eating good food and being pretty bored there at the I-4S4 base in Tuzla at the air base there. We didn't really do much. A couple times when we did do stuff, it seemed like our erstwhile NATO allies had done the little, hey, dude, you might want to move to the next safe house because the Americans are coming for you. So we could never prove it, but it was always frustrating in that regard. And that mission didn't really last very long, but it was an interesting introduction to a lot of the conventional military. We had a lot of brigade and battalion commanders that I later would run into in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so I was able to at least establish some sort of baseline of credibility, trust, bona fides, pick your adjective, with them. So it was good. So no great, there we were in the shootout with Bonnie and Clyde on the border, and in the Serbs. Although a couple, when I had to go to Sarajevo, every so often to check in with station and fill out the expense reports, and everything lives on paperwork. So we went out for lunch. And Sarajevo had sort of recovered, but a lot of the skyscraper, the taller buildings, were still very devastated from the Serb bombardment and things like that. But as we're walking along on the sidewalk, there are these giant red splotches that have faded a little bit with the weather, but they're splotches, and no, it's not real blood. But so we're sitting down in the sidewalk cafe, and the where it's summer in Sarajevo, so, and the Bosnian girls are they're one-eyed Jack Muslims type of thing, so they're a little bit freer in their dress, and so we're having a good 2-hour lunch watching the traffic go by. And I asked the proprietor, I say, hey, so what's with these red splotches on the sidewalk? And she goes, oh, those are the Sarajevo roses. I go, well, what are those? And she says, well, that's where the Serbian snipers killed our fellow citizens, and that's how we memorialize where they fell. So that was a little awkward, weird, but it was. And then she added, because you're kind of going, gosh, are you guys ever going to get over this, or is this going to be one of those, 1,000-year civil war, genocidal, ethnic conflicts? And she says, we will never forget and we will never forgive. And I'm going, oh, great, I guess I better find a good place to rent because my grandson's probably going to show up here.
Yeah, job security. Well, what year was this from?
So yeah, this was 2002, 2003. I can't recall exactly, but it was in the early days of the war, and that's why I'm saying somebody at JSOC decided to dilute the CT effort in Afghanistan. We hadn't gone into Iraq yet, and to start hunting pifwicks, and so when we get to the air base, it's a NATO air base, so it's real funny. We're the OGA guys. We don't exist, and this airplane doesn't exist, and this type of thing. So we have to be really careful how we. But luckily, there's a bunch of contractors running around, so we just blend right in with all the KBR toads and everybody else. But we're living in Sabre City, which was the old soft compound plywood village, if you will. And we're sleeping one night after a long night of mission. It's like 3 a.m, and all of a sudden it's literally like there's a massive commotion outside. It seems like the SIF from Patton Barracks or Kaserne up in Germany had showed up for a training exercise, and they were bursting into my hooch and bursting into my pilot's hooch and my mechanic's hooch, and yeah, it was probably not my most diplomatic with any 10th group people, but we worked it out.
So the Green Beret, the Special Forces Commanders and Extremist Force,
right,
decided to come in.
R.I.P.
Huh?
R.I.P.
Yeah, right. But they decided to come down and just do a training exercise on you guys.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the JSOC guy that was at the headquarters hooch, he was as shocked about it as we were. So, left hand meet right hand. Nobody really knows what was going on, but we worked it all out, and we did a couple. We showed them what we could do with our platform. So, I think, as I mentioned earlier, that helped us out later when I ran into 10th group guys in Iraq, and we were working in Samara and up that way. That they go, hey, I remember you. You're the guy we woke up.
So, what was the situation at that time like? I mean, was there a threat to you, or was everything so stabilized at the point in time that the PIFWIC was pretty much what these guys were on the run
In the wind.
Yeah.
Right. They were, yeah. Things were pretty stabilized, although, made sure you stayed on the hardball road between Tuzla and Sarajevo,
Right.
because there were still, mines everywhere. And although at the halfway point, there was this great mountain inn where we would always stop for refreshment and a potty break type of thing. But it was, there were still hulks of vehicles off on the side that had, either been shelled or had been run off the road or whatever. So it was one of the interesting things was, though, when I was listening to H.K. Roy's thing about the Iranians and meeting his Iranian LNO counterpart, or however he put it. Yeah. I remember talking to the JSOC guy. We were just sitting around chewing the fat, and he'd been there off and on throughout the beginning when the Americans first arrived, and he talked about the different U.S. soft forces going out into the woods, into where a lot of the rat lines were for the smuggling routes of weapons and support lines for the Serbs and all the other bad people, and they encountered Iranian Quds Force guys and things like that. So, I don't have any confirmation of it, but it was, the Iranians were not limited to the Middle East. So HK was spot on.
Yeah. They saw that as their way into Europe, essentially, the continental Europe at the time. It's pretty incredible. So, correct me if I'm wrong here, Ron, but it was a situation that your agency was, you said the platform was providing, the sort of ISR intelligence, and there were operators from the military side standing by to action any targets you were able to find on the ground?
Correct. Correct. And we'd also give them overwatch as they were ingressing and egressing an area, because the Serbs like to set up interdictive roadblocks en route to the target or returning to home base.
Yeah. So ISR is we're over there today. ISR is intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. That's when we say ISR.
Right.
That's what we're talking about. A platform that can provide that.
We're talking about a drone. Is what it comes down to. Yeah.
But this is before drones were cool.
Exactly. Drones were still experimental, or not experimental, but were still the new technology, and nobody was quite sure. It reminded me of my early days in the Air Force when desktop computers, of course, they were ginormous, the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, would show up, and with those, asphyxiating dust covers that they had to put over them, and all the senior officers would get them, and the things were just monuments to nothing because they were afraid to utilize them. And in the meantime, the rest of us are sitting there pounding away on our Selectric typewriters, trying to type stuff, and going, "Damn it! Anybody got any more corrective tape?" So, so new technology is always, it takes a while to get adapted to, but boy, it's now that it's addictive. As I mentioned in the last broadcast, we, during Anaconda, when single Pred would show up, everything stopped in the talk to watch Pred TV.
Right.
it's extraordinarily addictive. It's like watching the Kardashians, but with more violence.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's also, I mean, the thing that every commander covets so much, I mean, it's near real-time intelligence. It's like what, like a 5-second delay or something, but
it is. It
doesn't get better than that.
It's always getting better. I mean, in 06, when I was chief of base in Bagram, Afghanistan, we had a single predator line. That's what they called the. We had one line dedicated to ourselves when it was to the CJTF 76 folks, and but the problem was, and it was a training thing and an experiential thing, was the operators back at Creech or wherever at Creech Air Force Base outside Las Vegas. They tended to, because they're seeing the same thing we're seeing, and they would tend to like, ooh, bright shiny object to the left, and they would skew the camera, and we're like, no, dude, we're really following that vehicle or that person or that motorcycle or whatever there on the right. So and then of course you're just trying to yell at them over the hot mic and tell them where to skew the camera.
No, it's interesting because I didn't realize that around 2002 that they tried to ramp things up in Bosnia. Also, I would have thought that all of that would be getting not closed down but deprioritized.
Yeah, you would think so, but I mean, Kosovo was still going on, so I think they were trying to put it to bed. I mean, while we were there, the Army National Guard switched out, and I think it was Idaho National Guard showed up with a few of their Apaches, and so it was, and it's still going on. I mean, we're still deploying. A battalion plus or a brigade minus worth of U.S. troops out there on a continuous basis. And also in KFOR in Kosovo as well. So it's freaking ridiculous.
Did the boys haul anyone in while you were there?
We did not. Like I said, a couple times we had good indicators, good HUMINT, SIGINT, and we would get overhead and we would basically surveil the location for signs of life, of the type of person we were looking for. And yep, there he is. That one guy with the pompadour hairdo was a dead giveaway. So we would launch the force, and of course, even though it was an American operation, we had to coordinate with all our NATO partners, and that's why we always suspected that, somebody, got on the cell phone and called somebody, and the next thing we knew that, we're watching that guy skedaddle either across the border into Serbia or, he disappears into the woods. So yeah, it was. We always blame the French, but they were easy to blame.
And then Iraq happens, just the next year. And I mean, you found yourself over there pretty quickly, it sounded like.
Right, yeah, it was the first of 3 times. I got there right after Baghdad had been occupied, captured, and we were flooding the zone with U.S. troops. It was interesting. I mean, we were, again, because I'm in Air Branch, so I'm obviously going to be at BIAP at Baghdad International Airport, and we'd occupied a little niche corner of the airfield there that was isolated enough, but had access to the taxiways and runways and etc. So we were good. It was interesting. I mean, it was we were living in a building that was, I think, built by the highest bidding Italian architect, because I discovered that right angles are plus or minus 5 degrees, but the marble sure was expensive. And we discovered one of the, it's not so unique, the gold-plated or solid gold AK-47. We found one of those, and yay! I think that's in the CIA museum too now. I don't. So it was, but it was interesting. Primarily at that time, we were just doing logistical support to our teams that were spread out everywhere and supporting either the JSOC guys or the conventional military. Because our big thing back then was we were still looking for weapons of mass destruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms right there. How did that turn out? I mean, how did that go down?
Well, I don't know. David Kay, who I think, succeeded or knew Scott Ritter, one of your previous guests, and he was also a UN inspector or something. A real nice fella. Him and I talked a lot because he asked me to transport him and his inspectors to X or Y or Z, and I'd pick him up in a day or two, and I say, well, he says, nothing. It was frustrating, but he'd been charged directly by some senior levels in the Bush administration to do this. So it wasn't like we could, send the ambassador off somewhere else. We supported him, and like I said, he was a very nice fella.
There was this one story that you had brought up to me that you tried to steal Uday Hussein's Porsche, which would be the Porsche that Scott Ritter talked about in his episode that Uday came hauling ass doing Tokyo Drift right by him during the 90s when he was inspecting.
And to be fair, I don't think we can say that you tried to steal it. It did not have an owner.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I owned a Porsche Boxster at the time, and this was a gorgeous yellow one, and I think it was a Boxster, but I knew it was a convertible because the top was missing or had been tattered or ripped and shredded, but we discovered it in one of the parking lots there at the airport as we were surveying the primary terminal building, which is where we were discovering that the duty-free shop needed to be secured. So we took it upon ourselves to secure as much of the liquor as we could.
Take the high ground.
But in the parking lot we discovered this, and there's a bunch of Iraqis milling around, and I speak enough Arabic to get in trouble. So I asked them, I said, wow, a Porsche. And they claimed it was Uday's. So, and I don't know, I don't know if Scott described the color or not. I can't remember, but it was a yellow. But all the instrumentation had been ripped out, and somebody had tried to do the gangster start, do the on the steering column, the whole bit. It tore it up to shreds. So I say we tried to steal it. I mean, it would have been great if we had some sort of like Jordan flatbed to tow it back, and I could have my mechanics went, hey, when you're not busy keeping the airplanes flying, here you go. Here's another project for you. So we could have used that to tool around around the airfield to meet the different, because the Army and the Air Force were on the other side of the airstrip, so it was always a long drive, and we might as well arrive in style.
That's an unceremonious end to Uday Hussein's sweet ride.
Well, he had a very unceremonious end up north anyway, so it was no great loss.
You want to talk about how that
sure.
went
down? So one day it's a normal brown day in Baghdad. It's like, I mean, you guys have been there. It's like, it's another day in the desert, and it's brown, and occasionally people are mortaring you and shooting at you and things like that. But all of a sudden, some people are scrambling around. Everything's, there's the buzz of excitement in the air, and come to find out that the TIR guys, the task force guys, had located and were in the process of schwacking the crap out of Uday and I think his brother too.
Yeah, the three of them.
So, right. So anyway, so they were doing that, and but then there was a question because the bodies were so irretrievably decimated. I mean, they literally looked like hamburger meat, ground chuck. That they weren't sure that they got the right people, and they wanted to. And the special representative from the Bush administration, the Bremer, he wanted to make sure that everything was like that. So what they got was a bunch of tissue samples from the different corpses, and they put them in one of those medical transport boxes for like transplants and blood or whatever, and brought it back down. As that thing is coming down, screaming on a Black Hawk, David Kay approaches me and explains the situation to me, because he's the next senior administration guy in country after Bremer, the guy with the blue sport jacket and the desert combat boots, because he was too cool for school. And he says, hey, we need to do this, and we're getting a plane, an Air Force plane flying into Amman, and they can't fly into here for whatever reason. Again, the Air Force, and so how can we do this? I go, well, we'll fly it, and of course. So of course, but my crew had already flown a bunch of missions that day, so there's always that thing about crew rest. Well, I go explain it to the pilot and the co-pilot, and they have no problem with crew rest. I mean, they're not under Air Force orders or Army orders or anything like that anymore. So and we make the arrangements to fly to Amman. I coordinate with the folks in Amman. Hey, we're going to fly into the airport. Make sure we get landing clearances. You guys can make it happen a lot quicker than I can from here with my limited comms. And they did, and so we flew off, and we flew to Amman, and we turned it over, had them sign a chain of custody thing. So if it ever went to a court of law, I couldn't be held responsible for peeing on Uday's corpse or remains or whatever. So sorry, graphic, yeah, contaminating the evidence, and. So I asked the guys there, say, hey, it's pretty late. We've been up busy all day. Started really, really early. I don't suppose we could stay overnight at the Sheraton here in Amman and go back to Baghdad in the morning.
Right.
Nope. The chief wants you guys to go. You guys can't stay. We don't have that kind of diplomatic clearances.
See, that's
all right,
when the pilot has to pull the crew rest thing, though. That's when the pilot's got to play the crew rest card.
Oh, and also the plane broke.
Right. Plane broke.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't be part of the Air Branch motto. Our airplanes don't break. We damn it, I got Scotch tape and baling wire around here somewhere. We'll make it go. But anyway, so we at least get a squirt of fuel and fill up the tanks, and off we go, flying back to Baghdad. As we're about 30-45 minutes out of landing at Baghdad International, we're talking to the control tower. There were Australians running the control tower as part of the coalition forces, and the Australians in there, the Australians have such a great way of saying things. They explained to us that we, for our own safety and health, that we needed to take an unconventional approach and come in at a lot lower altitude and fly a very lots of hard right angle turns and things like almost like we were following a highway or some streets and things like that. And we were going, okay. And as we're getting very close to the airport, and we're about 5 minutes from landing, and we can see Baghdad is, the city had intermittent electrical power at that time because of the infrastructure damage, but this place was lit up like a 4th of July celebration, or like London during the Blitz, because it seemed like tracers were going up every which way. So I guess every Mohammed and Uday and Mahmoud or whoever grabbed their AK-47 out of the closet and was shooting off all his ammo into the sky. Which was also quite dangerous because, what goes up must come down. But it was.
Was it because Uday and Qusay were killed? Is that why they were celebrating?
Right.
Was it the World Cup?
They had heard the news, even though it hadn't been confirmed. Oh yeah, they were. I mean, so yeah, there was no love lost for the Saddam regime, but it was like, really, people, can you like maybe just dance and clap and cheer, but you have to shoot every gun off, type of thing. It was that was a little. I think that was about the most dangerous time I ever had in an airplane with Air Branch. It was like I'm going to get shot down by celebratory fire.
Yeah, it was like that during the World Cup too. It was insane during the World Cup when Iraq would win a game. And I mean, it did. It looked like World War II.
So yeah, it was exciting. I mean, I flying to the from the airport over to the U.S. compound over in downtown Baghdad there, and I'm temporarily having a brain fade. I can't remember what we used to call it, the zone, the green zone. That's it. And we were flying over, and we're just sort of tootling along, flying over the Stinky River and things like that. And I'm looking out of the side of the helicopter, and And there is literally like right out of the old DIA fact book, which used to have, it was like the Sears catalog of Soviet weapon systems. There is a gorgeous SA-2 sitting on a launcher missile with his fan song radar partner in the middle of a residential street. And I'm going, oh. So not that I don't think it was plugged in and operating, but I think that's where they were trying to disperse some of their weapons before we rolled into Baghdad. But it was just kind of like, wow, so that stuff really does look like that up close. So it was a little funny.
Surreal.
Yeah, it was surreal. So it was, Baghdad was weird that time. I mean, we would, once, by the time I got there, about a month into my 3+ month first trip there, the Washington VIP started arriving because, War Tourista gets you, like, I don't know, double passports, green stamps or something like that. I'm not sure. And we had Buzzy Krongard show up. He was at the time the executive director of the agency. It's a position that doesn't exist anymore. He'd convinced Director Tenet that he could be like the chief operating officer of the agency while Tenet did his thing at the White House and with the congressional leadership and things like that. So Buzzy shows up and he's a multimillionaire Baltimore investment banker and things like that. And he gets off the airplane and he's wearing a safari bush jacket and and he immediately wants me to issue him a weapon and go out on patrol somewhere because he wants to hunt Hajis. And no, that's not going to happen, boss. By the way, let me introduce you to the chief of station and so on and so forth. But he was really frustrated. It was afterwards. He stopped me.
He was frustrated because he stopped me. Go out. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, he was frustrated. Buzzy always postured himself as a man's man, and he always, he would always, thump his chest and try to, like, let's do push-up contests, and I mean that's sort of an attitude. Yeah, it was because he felt I don't know, it was like his midlife crisis late in life or something like that, but. After one conversation we had at the little bar we had there in the building, is he's asking me how things are going, and by this time we'd been up and down Route Irish and tooling around and done the tourista pictures under the cross swords and things like that, and I said, well, the Iraqis the people aren't getting the word. They don't know what's going on. So the only people telling them are the bad guys who are out in the souks, in the marketplaces, on the streets, spreading rumors and bad news. And it's, we're losing that fight. And he looked at me like I had a dick grown out of my forehead. So I'm not quite sure what was the problem. But, by the time I came back the next time, the insurgency was just starting to really get going in full bore. It was bad. I mean, Bremer had made some pretty terrible decisions, disestablishing the Ba'ath Party, which was one, and then telling the Iraqi army, who had all basically gone home, they'd taken their bat and ball and gone home, but the U.S. was still paying their salaries. So, I mean, it's good work if you can get it. I can be an Iraqi soldier and I don't have to do anything. Well, Bremer cut off their paycheck. So, gosh, what am I going to do now? I know I'm going to get mad at the people who cut off my paycheck, and I have skills, and there are people around here that could utilize my skills. So we really effed that up a whole lot.
Yeah, that is for sure. Let's get some real questions real quick. We got a couple questions for you, I think. First off, welcome everybody. I know Jack already welcomed you, but thanks for joining us. So Andrew Dunbar, Jack and Dave are creating a repository of oral history. Meanwhile, I am asking serious people dumb questions about giraffe prices, only in America. Andrew, I don't. That's an important part of American history.
The giraffe stuff?
Yeah.
That was the J.T. Patton episode.
Yeah, but Andrew's criticizing himself for asking questions about giraffes. But
it's one of those questions I didn't know how much I wanted to know that a giraffe sold for until he asked it.
Yeah.
And then I really wanted to know.
Yeah, I think Inquiring Mind wants to know.
But if it's the giraffe in the Skittle commercial, then I'm all for it.
Ron, did you ever run into the Perfumed Prince, a.k.a. General Wesley Clark, and were you there when the Pristina incident happened?
Wow. Well, yes and no. I was not in Pristina. As I told you in the last episode, prior to going to Air Branch, I was in the Office of Military Affairs and working in their exercise shop. And one of the things, one of the exercises I got to participate in was in Kaiserslautern, Germany, at the U.S. European Command's Warrior Prep Center, which was a set of buildings that had been reconfigured for simulation exercises, command post exercises, that sort of thing. And General Clark had gotten into his pea brain that he wanted to invade Montenegro. So he decided that we were gonna sand table this, or war game it, if you will, at the Warrior Prep Center at first, and he gave us his commander's intent and guidance, and I'm thinking, oh Lord, everybody wants to be Lord Nelson, Napoleon Bonaparte type of thing. I mean, the way he was strutting and posturing, and it's like, really? I mean, MacArthur did it really well. Gregory Peck did it even better in the movie, but dude, you can't carry the tune. But anyway, so we're all putting it together. As the exercise guy running for the agency, I went and got a guy from the Balkans shop to come in, and he had a lot of experience. And one of the things when we got together and we were putting together the plan, he's talked about how the Montenegrins, they were the super Serbs. They make the Serbs look like pussies. I mean, they're the ones that the Ottomans never could really defeat. And as we were putting the plan together, it was, I'm glad it was never executed, because they were going to drop at least a battalion, maybe two, and the 173rd guys into Pristina. That's the capital of Montenegro. And it sits in a bowl. And the Montenegrins had AAA sites on all sides of the upslope on the valley, so the C-130s would have basically been, flying through crossfire, and we would have lost a lot of good people and a lot of good airplanes and things like that. In the meantime, the Marines were going to do a landing and then advance along a single threaded line route, or LOC, line of communication route, into Pristina. This route was flanked on either sides by some bodies of water, and so they were basically going to be single filed. And it was like, even Ray Charles with an old World War II cannon is going to be able to knock you guys out, and then you're going to, it's like, has anybody seen the movie A Bridge Too Far? It's like the single line of advance is not a good thing. So we pointed all this out. General Clark and his sycophantic staff were not too happy with that. So yeah, it was. Like I said, I went back to the agency and I said, we are not going to do this. And the officer I'd brought with from the Balkans area, he was even less diplomatic than I was to his bosses and to the chiefs of station there throughout the Balkans.
What was the rationale for this proposed operation?
It never really came out. For some reason the Montenegrins weren't, jumping into bed with us, and they were sort of the outliers. They were allied with the Serbs, but they were independent. They were doing their own thing, and so we were going to, Clark thought he needed to show somebody a lesson, and they were going to be an object lesson. He thought it was going to be an easy nut to crack, and it turned out not to be so, and thank goodness we didn't do that. And I believe now they're members of NATO. So, small favors.
Yeah. Vasilis Chronopoulos. I hope I said that.
That's my friend. That's Bill.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. He just said, "Yo, Team House," or is it "Yo, Team House"?
You have to say it with a Greek accent.
I go ahead.
Yeah, Team House.
Perfect. Let's see if there's anything else there. I heard it was called Crack for Generals. I don't know what that is. Jack, can we please get some more Samrak Pencott swag?
I can work on it.
Okay.
So, Ron, let's transition, if we can, over to Afghanistan, because when we were talking a little bit earlier about some of your, multiple deployments to Afghanistan, there's some things I didn't realize, that you had a pretty unique perspective on some pretty major events that happened over there. One of them was when our base, I don't know if you can say the name of it, but when Fob Chapman got blown up in Koust. That was a pretty significant event, major event for the CIA. Lost, how many people were lost in that attack? 7?
I believe so, yes, and a lot of critically wounded as well.
Mm-hmm. And how did you intersect with that event?
Well, I fortunately I was not in country at the time. However, I had before. I had recently attended the Chief of Station seminar, which is I think they put it on 3 or 4 times a year. It's to train the outgoing chiefs of base, chiefs of station, everybody from Chief of Station Moscow to, lowly Chief of Station Bagram or where else. And I had been slated to go to another Chief of Base assignment. And one of my classmates was Jen Matthews, the now deceased Chief of Base of Coast. We always called it Coast. And she was a brilliant, smart person as regard to the Al Qaeda target set, the Haqqani set, and but she was. Nervous is maybe too strong, and I want to say up front, right before I get too much further, that this is not to denigrate her and her sacrifice and the sacrifice of the others, but it goes to something that I'd been worried about starting at about that point in time and continue to my last trip out there into 13, was that the agency was looking around going, "Hey, you've never gone, you go." But these people weren't as well qualified as they needed to be or should have been. And now Jen, on paper, was extraordinarily well qualified. I mean, she knew the target set, but managing a base in a war zone, especially coast, at the forward edge of the battlefield, I mean, they were directly opposite the Haqqanis in Miram Shah, and they were fighting a lot of twilight battles. I mean, the old Coast Protection Force, which was probably the most awesomest OGA paramilitary force that we had. I mean, they were giving the Haqqanis as good as they got. In fact, the Haqqanis, I think, were losing more than they were winning against the KPF guys. But Jen sat next to me and goes, "Hey, you've got a lot of Afghan experience, blah blah blah," and I'm really nervous, so I'm really worried about the ground branch guys. Are they going to be a problem? I go, "Well, what do you mean a problem? Well, are they just going to run off and do their own thing?" I go, "Yeah, no. In fact, the opposite. These guys a lot of these guys, especially the contractors, they seem to rotate, like an old Navy submarine crew, a blue gold. They do 3 months in, 3 months out, and then they just it keeps going like that. They have a lot of, and I told her these guys have a lot of area knowledge, they know the different personalities, not only the local on the base, but with the U.S. military down the road there at what was that? Salerno, yes. Always forget it because it was always underwater whenever I would show up there.
I was there
after a rainstorm.
Well, way back when.
I tried to reassure her about both the ground branch officers and the GRS, the security folks, the global response staff, which was our security force, which is both staff officers and contractors to do it. We had multiple conversations on this, trying to get her comfortable with working with SOG people and GRS people. She came from a staff position in CTC, and she'd done a European PCS assignment there in Europe. So that's a totally different leopard, whole different bunch of spots there. And from everything you learn after the fact, the way she negated what her chief of security told her, what the ground branch guys told her about bringing the bad guy directly into the post without any sort of searching and things like that, which violated a bunch of tenets. I mean, you try to drive onto the station in Kabul, I don't care who you are, you're going to go through, lots of different checks and things like that. So, it just seemed like, I don't want to say I blame myself, but I got really mad because I told her, I said, you need to trust this. But then going out a couple more years later, I was invited to sit in on a review of the after action review or the incident report, the investigation that the agency had done. So a bunch of us people show up, and it's, hey, I haven't seen you since 2001, 2002, and so we all go into this room, and we sit down, and the lady, the senior officer there, she stands up and says, "Okay, we're gonna go over this, but there will be no criticism of any agency officer or office." So of course, being the stupid ass that I am, I go, so if we happen to, even if XYZ station made a major boo-boo, made a mistake, we can't acknowledge that, and the report doesn't even acknowledge that. And she just looked at me and says, "What part about not criticizing anything don't you understand?" I'm like, oh my God. So I'm going, this is going to be educational. And
they brought you in to help put together the after action review. Was that the point of it?
No, it had already been done. We were just there to receive it, and gotcha. It came away as shit happened, and there's nothing that none of us could have done and foreseen it. And everybody gets a gold star, and we mourn those we lost. No accountability, and nobody paid the price. I mean, it was a lot. It was almost like the perfect storm. The chief of station had just arrived in country maybe less than a week before. So, and thank goodness he had been there. This was his second tour as chief of station, so he was able to rapidly fly out there, and he was able to get the people squared away and things like that. Because the previous chief of station, who let a lot of this stuff go or had approved a lot of the planning, he would have been absolutely the wrong person. Those people would have fallen apart. And then other stations through in the region, as well as elsewhere in the greater neighborhood, if you will, Europe. Everybody was. I think everybody was so excited about this asset or what he represented that we failed to do our due diligence and ask the right questions. Everybody was like, "Ooh, it's the golden goose. We're gonna we got it," and it's
always when you. I would think you would be a little skeptical that you're getting baited into some sort of an ambush if it sounds too good to be true.
Well, yeah.
I say that with hindsight, of course. I'm here, all these years later saying that. I understand.
Right. And I understand it too, but I've always had a healthy dose of skepticism, and as you say, if it's too good to be true, and plus, like I said in the last broadcast, I'm married to a counterintelligence officer, so I've learned to be quite skeptical. So our kids really had a hell of a time growing up because we never let them get away with anything. But there was this guy would violate the potential asset, the person that killed everybody. He failed so many operational tests, and he failed to adhere to some security checks and protocols that for anybody else you would have been dropped like a hot potato. But because he offered, I can get you to the inner sanctum of the Haqqanis, that everybody like, well, he can't give us that because that'll ruin his security with the Haqqanis and things like that. So, they played us, and they played us really, really well, and we paid the price. And the bad thing is I'm not sure that we truly really learned the lessons that we needed to, because as you pointed out, Jack, that nobody got held accountable.
And your point is that the after action review also it just kind of chalked it up to an act of God, that this sort of event just happened, that there wasn't a cause and effect involved.
Pretty much right. And those 7 Americans lost their lives, and all that could have been prevented, and it's terrible, just terrible.
Yeah, that's horrible. But from there, some of your deployments to Bagram, you were telling us how you had kind of, I don't know, I guess all of your time over there was unconventional, so to speak, but that it wasn't a traditional agency posting, that you were doing some fairly irregular things that maybe some of the other people in country weren't able to do.
Right. Yeah. So Bagram base was a unique base in the Afghan theater. Of course, the agency has its station, and then they have other bases throughout southern and eastern Afghanistan, and all these bases have a counter-terrorist and an intel collection mission. Bagram base was a little bit different. It had started out as an OMA, Office of Military Affairs, liaison post, but as Bagram became the headshed for U.S. forces in Afghanistan, the establishment of the BTIC, the Bagram Theater Internment Facility, or BTIF, and the Siege of Sodef guys headquartering there as well, and the task force guys, it became more of a base, and with some limited collection with the detainees in the BTIF, and so it gets advertised, and I'm reading the advertisement, and I'm going, yeah, I can do all this. So I apply, and I get selected, and off I go. And luckily, the chief, who happened to be the same chief that had just taken over during the coast, when the coast bombing happened, was there. And of course, I meet him because I'm the outgoing subordinate commander, if you will, and I've got to get my commander's intent, and what do I do, boss? What are my left and right limits? Where's the touchdown zone? What do I need to do to get at least a survivable fit rep at the end of this tour? And not that I was worried, but he looked at me, and he the normal platitudes, how's the wife, how's the kids, blah blah blah. He says, I need you to make sure that there's zero daylight between what we're doing, what the agency's efforts are doing with our counter-terrorist pursuit teams out there, and our collection assets, and the U.S. military. And he didn't further define the U.S. military, so that included both the conventional folks, the Siege of Sodef, the Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan, and the task force guys, the JSOC guys that were there. So I had basically 3 accounts that I had to manage, massage, and make nice with. The person I was relieving came up to Kabul to meet me. Great officer. I owe a lot of my success that year, the year I served there in Bagram, to him. I told people he he poured the foundation and framed the house, and all I did was put up some drywall and made it look pretty. But he did a lot of good work for me, and I always appreciated that. And if he's listening, see, I told you I'd say that in public. So but anyway, so I get there, and the old Army unit is still present, and they haven't quite ripped out yet. Well, they're in the process of changing over. It was CTAF, the old Southern European Airborne Task Force guys out of Vicenza, before they became the 173rd and everything like that. And it was a General Camilla. And so he would come to the morning update, and I observed this for at least 2 weeks. And, of course, my predecessor, he told me this was his entire year's experience. Camilla would get the update and then retreat, not retire, but retreat to his office and close the door, and you wouldn't see him again until the evening update. And getting access to him was extraordinarily difficult to, talk about anything. Our primary point of contact at that time was a up-and-coming Army colonel by the name of Bill Mayville, who later went on to command the 173rd that did the extraordinary combat jump there into Kurdistan. Sorry. And he went. Yeah, sorry. I love Bill. He's a good people and everything like that. But I got to rib him on that. But and I intersected with him at other points. On other trips to Afghanistan when he was in the 82nd, and then later at the Pentagon when he was on the Joint Staff. But and Mayville was a good guy, and one of his and the deputy. The J3 was a guy who went on to command the 173rd also, or one of the battalions, or anyways. And he got wrapped up in a lot of bad stuff, so he didn't last long. But anyways, so. In a commander's update brief for people listening, you are where you sit. So if obviously the general, the principal, he sits at the head of the table, and his immediate deputies sit on either side of him. It's very much like the royal court.
It's like a bunch of 16-year-old girls in the cafeteria in high school.
Yes, and I wasn't one of the mean girls, so I didn't belong. So and then all the other, staff codes, the intel, the ops, the plans, whatever, they all sit around the table. We were relegated to the side chairs along the wall. So basically we had to do the little prairie dog pop up to get our attention, get the general's attention when we wanted to input. And of course, my predecessor, his input was whenever they would go once around the world, nothing to add, nothing to say. And I'm going, well, that's crazy. Why am I wasting 2 hours of my life here in the morning if I've got nothing to add? Because I'm sure I do. But that it was still his base, and I was just transitioning. So 2-week transition time goes through, and the chief of station comes up and gives me the once over and says, gives me the and says, you're good to go. And he takes my predecessor with him on the airplane back to Kabul, and that's it. So suddenly I'm going, oh shit, now what do I do? So in the meantime, the 10th Mountain guys are ripping in, and so it's a totally different dynamic. They're energetic. They'd spent over a year and a half at Fort Drum training for this assignment, so they were extraordinarily well prepared. The funny thing is, so Mayville and all his senior colonel staff, all his S codes or J codes or whatever codes they were, they all got kicked out of their hooches by their 10th Mountain replacements. He had nowhere to stay. Well, Bagram base, we had a pretty large facility and not very many people, so I said, you can stay with us. So Mayville always appreciated that because he had his own room with his own shower and everything like that. So it was a good deal for all of them. And they were still close enough to the headquarters building or the hangar with the headquarters building built inside of it that they weren't that far away. Anyways, so the CTAF guys eventually all leave, and it's just the 10th Mountain guys. And I'm all by myself, and I'm sitting along along the side, and I meet the J2 for the first time, and him and I have become very good friends, and it's a sad shame that the Army didn't promote him to general when it was they had that opportunity, because they'd rather promote SIGINT people than combat intel officers. But he jumped into Panama as a young lieutenant in the Ranger Bat as the assistant S2, and I understand that the S2 got injured, so he suddenly, Lieutenant, you're the battalion S2, don't fuck it up, and and he did great, and if you're listening, Mo, thank you. So, anyways, so I meet Mo, and Mo had spent a lot of time with the Rangers in Iraq and elsewhere, so he had some interactions with the agency in the past, which I discovered and shocked me, is that not everybody loves us. I was shocked, and he goes, and he's very busy shuffling papers, and I'm trying to block his way because I want to, dude, I'm your guy, I'm your counterpart here, help, come on, let's work together on this. And he says, I don't have a very good opinion of you guys. I'm like, oh God, it's going to be a hard target recruitment. I mean, KGB guys would be easier. So it was. But anyways, we ended up working it out, and he pulled me aside. And he says, "Hey, you got to get to the table. You got to get a seat at the table, and the only way you're going to do that is if you start sharing stuff." So I started looking for stuff to bring to the morning meeting that I could reasonably share without violating sources and methods, and things that would contribute to their mission, and not impede ours or anything like that, but to show I was willing to give them something, and I got to sit at the table. Ooh, Mikey got to sit at the big table.
Did they have to kick somebody out of the table to get you there? Or did they just...
Whose silver chair did you steal?
Yeah.
I don't remember, but I know that the chief of staff, he had a lot of fun rearranging the seating assignments, and somehow my seat kept migrating closer and closer to the head of the table. So it's like I must have been doing something right. And in fact, towards after a couple months, so after these normal briefs with the entire staff and the peanut gallery filled with important or self-important people, the briefing would conclude and everybody would be dismissed. The general a lot of times would ask for his inner circle to stick around, which would be the deputy commanding general for operations and for support, the 2 and the 3, the intel chief and the ops chief, maybe the ops plans or FU plans, FU ops guy, future operations, future plans, and me. So, boy, that was a fun little email to send to the chief of station saying, "You'll never guess where I'm at." So I'm trying to let him know that I'm doing a good job. I'm adhering to his commander's intent. So it was pretty cool, and because of my sharing, and I would be sharing stuff like, hey, our guys down in Shkin are reporting XYZ, and the guys over at, Organy are reporting this, and guys down in Kandahar, so on and so forth. So they say, hey, I'm taking a battlefield circulation trip in that way. Why don't you come along? And you can introduce me to your counterpart there at Asadabad or Jalalabad or Coast or wherever, and so I said, yeah, great. So I would send them a little saying, hey, we're coming out. I'm coming in the General's Black Hawk, and he'd like to meet you and just kind of get a 5-minute data dump of what you can tell them, and things like that. Here's what I've told him, and already, so you don't bore him with repetition, even though he is a general, he probably needs some repetition. But so anyways, yeah, it worked out really well. So I got to go to a lot of places that OGA guys never got to see, except read about it in books and things like that. Got to go up to Cop Keating, which was the cop that got pretty much overrun by the enemy I think a year or two later.
It was like incompetently planned where the FOB was built.
Oh, we flew in on the Black Hawk, and literally you got to fly from Asadabad, and you're following one river, and it's basically like doing a slalom course in a Black Hawk. You're veering from canyon wall to canyon wall. It's thank God I didn't get airsick. And then you're flying up kind of to the northeast, and then you hang a hard left, and you're going pretty much straight west to Keating along another river valley, and again you're looking out, and you're seeing the little villages, basically hanging on by their fingernails along the mountainsides along the river. There's a POS road. POS, for those listening, is a piece of shit road, and well, Dave always explains the acronyms. I figure I need to as well.
Well, it's one of those roads that's basically hand carved out of a mountainside, right?
Oh, exactly.
When they take like the Jenga trucks or the buses down them, they have to do about a 16-point turn. You got a guy in the back that's hard chalking it when it backs up, so that it doesn't go too far.
I've been in some of those slot canyons where it's like you said, either somebody took a pickaxe and maybe like 100 years ago they actually got a hold of dynamite and blew it wide enough to drive a Hilux through. But I mean,
And so...
And in the springtime, of course, the floods would always wash out parts of the road too. So it always, it was a never-ending battle to keep land transportation going.
Keating. What area was that in? What was the strategic importance of it? What was the idea behind it?
Well, it was up in the middle of God knows where Nuristan, and it was the strategic value was. If at the time it sounded really great and everybody was on board with it. Of course, looking back on it now, you kind of go, were we really that stupid? The strategic intent was to constantly put these little ink spots or places where the ANA and coalition forces could then extend their influence out and basically push the bad guys out. And so we were trying to get it right. And this was in the middle of a heavily, according to the intelligence at the time, heavily infested area of Taliban and Al-Qaeda and all sorts of bad people. So, of course, once I saw that, I go, you know what? They can have this because I know they're physically fit and they can hike like nobody's mother. But good Lord, it's going to take them at least a few days to get anywhere to do anything. And so, but yeah, so we flew into Keating, and the Black Hawk had to land on a gravel bar in the river when the water was low, and we observed the base, and I basically got a neck ache from looking up everywhere around me, and they pointed out where the Overwatch OP was, and how do you get there? We walk, and I go, Jesus, I mean the slope must have been, I don't know, 30 degrees. It was, and then of course, U.S. soldiers are carrying, body armor and, their basic kit. And, oh, geez, it's like, guys can't get a Black Hawk to do an elevator lift for you. They go, no, because people shoot at us. So, and then of course, the rest is history. I mean, Jake Tapper's book, The Outpost, is actually a pretty good, overall view of what happened and things like that, and the bravery that the U.S. soldiers displayed that day. And I mean, it was, but yeah, Keating was interesting. And what I would do after these things is I would write a little report to the station, and then I would send email copies to and then not a formal report like a cable, but just an email to my boss at the station, who was the chief of ops, and info the chief of station, and I'd send it to various offices in headquarters, CTC and the people in the conventional ops division dealing with Afghanistan, and the analyst people as well, because to give them a sense, it wasn't a well scripted intel report or anything. I was like, hey, I flew here, this is what I observed, these are my concerns, these are some of the good things, this is how maybe we can help support them, things like that. And in fact, at one time they were thinking of opening up, I think, Dave, you mentioned Falcon earlier. Falcon Base earlier earlier today. Anyways, so Falcon Base was another base that was created, and at one time they thought they could establish Falcon Base, co-locate it there with Keating, and so I brought the guys up there, and we landed in a 47, and we had to unload everything. And yeah, it goes back to my earlier comment about selecting the right people for the job. None of them lasted very long, and we had to evacuate them after about a week, and then they established Falcon where it was finally established after that, which was much closer to the target sets that they determined they wanted to go after. So,
wow, I mean, it's just insane to hear, straight from you how all this stuff kind of shook out. I mean, and I want to ask, in the aftermath of the attack on Keating, I mean, what were the findings from that? If you were present for the development of some of those AAR bullets, and whether or not it was a whitewash like Chapman was.
I don't think it was. I wasn't asked to participate in the AAR, or I wasn't interviewed or anything like that. And I haven't read Tapper's book in a while, so I don't remember what the AAR reporting said or anything like that. But I don't think anybody got severely punished. I mean, everybody tried to do a good job. I mean, the reasoning at the time, I mean, looking back at it now, 10, 12 years later, the reasoning then was legitimate, and according to all, we all felt it was legitimate. But now looking back on it, we kind of go, really? It's like the invasion in World War II of a couple of the islands. We really didn't need to do it, but we had the Marines floating around there. We needed to do something with them, I guess. So yeah, that's not to denigrate the sacrifice or anything like that, but it was a good effort. The problem was, while we could sustain it as the U.S. Army, as the United States of America, the ANA, it was multiple bridges too far. There was no way they were going to sustain that or even participate in it with any sense of active participation.
And just to back up a moment, or not necessarily back up, we're kind of right smack dab in the middle of it, so maybe it's a good time to mention this. I was just wondering if you could talk about the relationship, the liaisons, because you were talking about how your job was to make sure there wasn't any daylight between the agency endeavor and the U.S. military. And on the U.S. side, you got to juggle, the prima donna soft guys and the conventional guys. And then also, the agency has their agenda, which is, strategic intelligence. The military likes to go out there and blow things up and do kinetic operations. And the agency also had their ninjas on the ground too. But
right.
I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit about how you kind of juggled all these balls and maintained those relationships and deconflicted, because I think it's just very interesting that you have these two institutions that their mission statements are just very different. And from what you were telling me, it kind of worked in this situation because of your personality and this guy Mo. You were able to form a friendship, and it just speaks to the fact that literally the strategic success or failure hinges on the personalities and whether or not they are able to mesh together. Right. Had you guys hated each other's guts, I mean, there really could have been strategic implications from those kinds of lack of coordination.
Yeah,
exactly. You're absolutely right. And once I'd established that relationship with Mo, then it was Mike Koss, who was the three, and Kurt Vanderstein, who'd come over from the Command and Staff College to work in the plans, in the Intel plans section, and a bunch of other great American officers who I could be here like the Academy Awards and I could thank everybody, but but seriously, they were all good people. And I really, and as I told visiting congressional delegations and staff delegations, that in my guesstimation, the 10th Mountain team, they brought over 3rd Brigade, Spartan Brigade, headed by then Colonel John Nicholson, and then their headquarters. They had really formed they were like a ginormous ODA. They really went out and were trying to work it hard. from a FID, internal defense, unconventional warfare, get the population off the fence and onto your side type of thing. I was always really impressed with that. Major General Frakely, who retired as a 3-star out of a Sessions Command out of Fort Knox, he was the CG. He did a tremendous job. He expressed a lot of confidence in his staff. He showed that he picked the right people. One of the first things he did after he assumed responsibility, not a command, but assumed responsibility for the CJTF, was he hosted a luncheon for all the players, and there in his little general officer's dining room, which was no better than the regular DFAC, but it was cool. We actually had linen, so it was neat. But anyways, so there was Colonel LaCamera from the task force, and then Ed Ritter from 7th Group, and so it was a bunch of people. So it was an opportunity to meet them, and Ed Ritter was I love Ed, and he's a tremendous American, great special forces officer. Yeah. But we was behind his back. We'd never say it to his front because he'd rip your face off. We always called him a silverback because he always reminded us of that old Far Side cartoon where all the young gorillas are in the gym class and the one kid's already a silverback, type of thing. So he was that big of a guy, and so he was. But you asked the question, how do you do it? Well, I'd worked with the different ODAs from all the different groups in Iraq prior to that, and so one of the things I learned early on is to talk to them, is to them being your audience, your military audience. You got to speak their specific language. So if I'm talking to special forces guys, I'm not going to go in there and I can be all agency and type stuff, but I'm going to go.
Brethren, let us have a meeting today.
Yeah, no, I go in. I go in and I'll say, so who's the two? Okay, so I'm kind of speaking militaryese. And I say, so where are your 18 Foxes hanging out and things like that. So you start, a little bit about the way we're structured and how we do things and stuff like that. So it's. I was asked several times at the agency later on to, bottle this recipe for success and pass it out, and it's just really hard to do if because a lot of agency guys are like, well, we're Title 50 guys, we don't have to answer to anybody,
And they're trench coat and fedora.
Yeah, the green door syndrome, behind the green door, and no Maryland Chambers did not live back there. So but it was, I approached it from the aspect that my children were both in the military at the time. My daughter was a corpsman, who later ended up going to Kuwait and Iraq, and my son at the time, before he saw the light and joined the Army, he was a sailor. He was on a frigate, and he was actually deployed. So we would actually communicate via Cypernet, which I thought was always kind of cool. So he was somewhere in the Arabian Gulf, and I was stuck in Afghanistan. So, but anyways, I was approaching from that. Every one of those soldiers, whether he was the grizzled sergeant major of the division or of the group or whatever, to the brand new PV2 who literally just showed up out of A school and tech school or whatever, and still doesn't know how to put on his brand new ACUs type of thing. Each one of those is represented one of my kids, and I felt it was my job to make sure I could get up to the line where I couldn't reveal sources and methods and all that cool secret Obi-Wan Kenobi agency stuff, and then kind of lean way over as before my fat tummy pulled me over the line and made me do bad things. But it was that was the way I always approached it, and I think Ed Reeder and his staff, and later Chris Haas, when he brought third group over, they picked up on that. I know General Frakely and James Terry and Tony Tata, the three general officers in 10th Mountain. I think they picked up on it, and plus I would never lie to them. If I couldn't tell them or if I didn't know, I said so. And sometimes is anybody listening? I would say, I can't talk about it, and then I'd pull them aside later and says, yeah, wink, wink, nod, nod, nudge, nudge. You guys are barking up the right tree. So let it go at that. And I had to keep that level of trust, because as soon as you lie to, these guys were my battle buddies, and I couldn't lie to them. The task force was a little harder nut to crack. And I don't think I ever really cracked it, which is fine, because I'm not sure the juice wasn't worth the squeeze with them. They were a lot of respect for the Rangers and the SEALs that constantly rotated through, but their agenda was very much different from everybody else's. They did not do a good job of cross coordinating with the conventional or the oh yeah well we did a capture kill on this one compound. Oops, we killed some good people, some bad people, things like that. But it's not our job. Hey, local battalion from 10th Mountain or local ODA guys, you guys get to clean up my mess and that's make it all better.
That's why a lot of people on the conventional side get a bad taste in their mouth about the special operations dudes, because we go in there, we do the quote unquote night raids, as they call them in the New York Times. And it makes it not legitimately. Whether we do it right or we do it wrong, we go in there, we kill some people, and then we leave. We disappear on the black helicopters, and that conventional unit that's stationed in that area, or an ODA, ends up feeling the brunt of all of those retaliatory IEDs and rocket attacks, et cetera, et cetera.
Or just the people shutting you out. You were just starting to establish people because you want to find out where the IED networks are who's implanting the IEDs, where they're being built, where they're being assembled, or where they're being implanted. The local population knows everything. That's why. What's the old? I remember in the early days we wanted to put out some sensors, and so we like you can go to like Costco or whatever, those outdoor radio or speakers that look like boulders, but don't really look like boulders, or the things that you use to cover up those big green transformer boxes in suburbia type thing. So the tech wizards built a few rocks to look like this, and we put them in a rock field. Well, good Lord. A couple weeks later, some Afghan boy shows up at one of the fobs. Hey, mister, I found this. Does this belong to you? Did you lose this? Oh, yeah, I'll take that. No, it's mine. You pay me money. I'm like, yeah, okay, God help us.
That's awesome. That's all. The best part is that he brought it back. It was like, is this your spy gadget here? Right. You want this back?
Well, he didn't know what it was. He just knew it wasn't something natural, and it must be from the Western people, and it was a chance to make $1 or several hundred or 1,000, whatever.
Oh my gosh!
So,
but just on the relationships thing, I just wanted to mention this quick anecdote. I have a friend who was a Marine Corps officer, and he was one of those Marines that got to do an exchange with Delta and go over there and be an operator, or go through OTC, and then deploy with them. All that good stuff. And when he came back from that and came back to the Marine Corps, all the guys are asking him, well, what did you learn? What were the big takeaways? What's the greatest new, gadget that you strap to the side of your gun? What's the new tactic that you use to enter and clear a room? And he said, the thing I really took away from my time at the unit was relationships, and the importance of building those relationships with the adjacent units, with the interagency process, because of the dividends they play down the line. And I just feel like it's kind of important to bring that up, because, they make the movies about the dudes blowing down the front door and going and entering, clearing the room. But sometimes it's those liaison operations that pay the most dividends for you at the end of the day.
It really does, and also liaison with the host nations. I mean, as a SF guy, you understand about building those relationships, and that was the one thing I always admired about 10th Mountain. They really tried to mentor, train the battalion and higher staff of the ANA. Because the C-Sticka guys, the combined whatever training command for Afghanistan was an abortion. So it was not a good to do thing.
When you talk about 10th Mountain Silverbacks and Grizzled Sergeant Majors, I have to ask: did you ever get a chance to work with Frank Rippey?
I don't remember name tapes. I remember faces and getting yelled at. So
Okay, yeah.
I got my
There was
face
a
ripped off a
Sergeant
few
Major,
times for stuff
10th
that
Mountain Frank Rippey
other OGA guys did.
Well, no, he was Sergeant Major Frank Rippey out of 10th Mountain. I didn't know if you had met him or not.
No, I don't think I had. But I remember one time I'm sitting in my little OGA office there, minding my own business, and my phone rings, and it's Ed Retter. And why Ed had to use the phone, I don't know, because I think I could hear him yelling from a kilometer away. Anyways, he was pissed. So I I dutifully made haste to his office, where he had calmed down just a wee bit, but God, I'm glad I'd established some level of rapport and trust with him before that, because if not, it would have been irrevocably harmed. But so there was a total miscommunication, fuck up, however you want to put it, between an OGA location and his ODA, and involving local Afghans and things like that. They decided to the OGA guys had decided to detain some Afghans that the ODA guys were developing as sources for their operations, and despite the ODA captain going to the OGA base chief and explaining the situation to him, trying to be professional without getting because they lived right there in this small little fob, and he wasn't having it. So yeah, I got my face ripped off, and so I had to get on the horn to station, who then called the base, and the base finally said, well, okay, well, if you're telling me to do this, I'll let these guys go, but I just know they're bad. Well, if they are, they'll be bad again next day, but let the ODA guys know. But it was hard, because every ODA, when I tried to meet the ODAs before they would when they would come into Bagram, before they would go out forward, and or if they would rotate through or something like that, and just say, hey, this is your nearest or your neighbor OGA guy, here's his personality. Here's what buttons you don't want to push. Here's his good points. Here's his bad points. Here's how I think they can help you. And if they don't, well, go through your chain of command. But I'll try to do what I can for you. Probably not the smartest. Usurping my chain of command. But again, like I said, I'm looking at all those ODA troopers as one of my kids. Because my kids were wearing the uniform too, and I'd want somebody that could possibly make a difference. So
was that a common issue in your experience, that there was tension between either the military or the SF forces or
the military schwacking agency assets, or vice versa? I mean,
or a refusal to cooperate? Like, was that a thing, or was there? Did it happen more often than not?
The case I just brought was probably the rare instance. I mean, I think Ritter had a pretty good handle on his ODA, his team captains and team sergeants. So they tag teamed the guys pretty well. In fact, in a lot of places, like when we went to Shkin, they were thick as thieves. So that's always the better solution than antagonism. And with the conventional guys, not so much, again, because I'd worked really hard with the staff there at Bagram, as well as the different battalion chiefs, out in Organy and up at Jabad and down in Kandahar. So it was the problem really was, Dave, was the with the task force guys. They kind of wanted to do their own thing a lot of times, despite having programs where they would operate under our authorities and with our funding, but they would refuse to adhere to some ground rules.
And when you say task force, are you talking about like JSOC elements, essentially?
Right. Yes. Yeah. I'm not sure. I've seen it written as task force, so I'm just going to say task force,
Okay.
and hope that my jail cell's comfortable. So.
Let's get to some questions real quick, if you don't mind.
Go ahead. Let's get some questions.
Yeah.
No.
And let me just point out, I just want to give a little pitch. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please go ahead and hit that subscription button down below so that you get notified. You hit the bell icon so you get notified whenever we go live. We're trying to be pretty consistent now about going 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Friday.
Yep. That's our jam now.
That's it. And if you look down in the description of this video, there is a link to our first interview with Ron a few episodes back. You can go check that out if you like this one so far, if we're not boring you to tears. And there's also a link to our Patreon. If you like what we're doing and you want to support the stream, keep the lights on here, go take a look at that. And actually, it's as little as just $1 a month.
Honestly, $1 a month from everybody would it'd pay our rent, it'd keep us in Lefroy, it'd help us out tremendously.
And you get access to the bonus segments we film, which are honestly, they tend to be 30 to 60 minutes long each.
Yeah, and if you are a Patreon subscriber in the live chat or down in the comments, please, if you enjoy the content on Patreon, please mention it to other people. Let people know that it's good content.
Yeah, if you give this little video a thumbs up, if you leave a comment down there, all that stuff plays into YouTube's algorithm and helps us spread the meme of the Team House around the internet.
Yeah, the virus. The
virus, exactly.
The infection.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, so Ian's asking, were any of the three of you in Iraq during the Fallujah ambush in 2004? Thoughts of the general atmosphere at the time?
I wasn't.
No, I don't think I was. I may have been, but the atmosphere was, like I pointed out, the population when we first took control of the country, they were kind of like, okay, my daddy Saddam is no longer around, so Uncle Sam's now my daddy. What do I do? How do I, what's going on? Am I going to have electricity every day? Am I going to have fresh water supplied? I mean, the basic necessities. And we, I don't know, I think we weren't ready for that. And then, of course, Bremer and the Army 3-star who came in, who got fired pretty quickly after that, both were pretty weak in doing that. And so the population was sort of like aimless teenagers. They're sort of wandering around going, somebody give me some guidance, tell me what to do. And there was a lot of bad influencers in the marketplaces and in the villages, that were not so much Saddam loyalists, but they like to cause trouble, or they were jihadists. And I mean, we know after a while, I mean, Iraq was like the Burning Man for jihadist reunions. Everybody showed up, and I know it's terrible. I mean, I remember we were in Al Qaim. Along the Syrian-Iraqi border, and we got wind of some Russian tourists had entered Iraq and were making their way to Ramadi and Fallujah, and they were Chechens. They were bad guys. They were hardcore killers of people. And so we're chasing them down the highway to Fallujah. And, of course, the U.S. Army's got little checkpoints along the way to make sure that, everything is basically harassing the population because nothing had really kicked off then, at least, in that neck of the woods. And and we're radioing ahead. And, of course, you're dealing with multiple different units, and you have to tell the same story, and you try to establish rapport and trust over the radio or over a telephone line with some major or some sergeant first class explaining this. and you're saying, just hold them at the checkpoint. We'll take care of it all. All will be explained to you. But so literally we're catching up because I'm not driving. I'm pulling security on the passenger side, and but Mario Andretti here, he's driving down the road, and potholes be damned. It's not my vehicle. I don't give a shit about the suspension, and we're coming up to these Of course, we're coming up to these checkpoints. We got to slow down because the last thing I want to do is scare some poor private into thinking I'm Mahmoud, the suicide bomber, and we say, hey, did a couple of white guys just come through here? Oh, you mean the Russian tourists? Yeah, the Russian tourists. Yeah, they showed us their passports. I says, tourists in a war zone. Suspicious? Did you check the trunk? No. Okay, how long ago? Oh, just a few minutes ago. Well, I'm talking to some corporal who, like, a few minutes ago could have been like, really, dude? I got a can of Copenhagen here. Tell me honestly, And so, I was like 5 or 10 minutes ago. I said, "Shit, here you go." Boom, and eventually they get caught. They get caught in Fallujah. I mean, but it was but we're chasing them down the road. It was like it's one of those little silly things. Like you shake up. We go El Qaim. It's been a really long day, and the vehicle's pretty well beat to shit by now because of all the potholes and things like that. And Bradleys do wonderful things to asphalt roads, and so we're dog ass tired, and the boss there at El Qaim says, "So, how'd you spend your day?"
Chasing directions. Yeah.
Chasing jihadis.
I was in Iraq in 04 during like that. I was nowhere near Fallujah. But Fallujah, in all the face of Fallujah, presented a problem throughout the rest of the country because, a lot of times, Iraqis didn't understand why we didn't project more force. I remember
why we didn't have the iron fist.
Yeah, I remember, and to them there was nothing wrong with that, and that could have been part of the Sunni Shia split. But I remember, an Iraqi, saying, "Hey, Mr. Dave, you guys have nuclear weapons. Why don't you just drop a nuclear bomb on Fallujah?" And I said, "Well, the United States doesn't want to hurt innocent people." And he goes, "There are no innocent people in Fallujah," and so it just things like that really, in some ways, it diminished our image as this.
I remember I had a conversation with the SWAT team leader that I was working with in 2009 over there, and the conversation of the invasion came up, and I made some sort of like very American comment, like it's tragic how many Iraqi people died in the invasion, and that this happened, and it's tragic that it happened like that. And he just looked at me and shrugged. He was like, "America is strong. Why wouldn't you invade us?"
Yeah.
I was like, pfft. And that kind of mentality flies in the face of all of the political theory that I was taught at Columbia University.
Sure.
That about liberalism and cosmopolitanism, and that people like you and respect you when you come up and shake their hand and are nice to them. That's true in a lot of situations, but in the context we're talking about, and when you're going into these sorts of counterinsurgency environments, a lot of people respect strength.
Well, we've talked about this on the show before a little bit about the sort of the built-in fatalism in Islam. The whole inshallah, whatever God wills, right? Inshallah, and you wonder how somebody like Saddam could stay in power so long, and a part of it was because, well, he's in power. That's sort of the way it is, right? But let's see here. We got a couple more questions. And thanks, Ian, for the donation. Alex, thank you. Alex is saying we passed 100 on the subreddit our team house. Can you talk about the coffee shop at HQ? Can they not look at customers, say names, or use cards as payments?
Oh, is he talking about the Starbucks at Langley?
Well, we have a Starbucks and a Dunkin' Donuts. We believe in competition.
Fancy.
And there are two schools of thought in the headquarters building. You're either a Starbucks, well, there's three actually. You're either a Starbucks guy or a Dunkin' Donuts person, or maybe the cafeteria coffee. And then a fourth group, which refuses to set foot in either one because it's undignified in the agency to sit in a Starbucks, which is just like a real Gucci Starbucks down in Georgetown, and yeah, the employees are. They're cleared. I mean, they have the yellow badges like the cleaning crew does, and I don't think nobody uses their credit card there. So it's like if you do, you buy one of those with cash, those Starbucks rewards cards or whatever it is, and but it was I will say I enjoyed going to the Starbucks. It was nice. Although Dunkin' Donuts had the better donuts, obviously.
Are they allowed to look you in the eye, or do they have to keep their heads down?
Of course they are. Of course.
So what happens? What happens when they go John Smith, and like 10 guys come up to the counter?
Yeah, they're pretty good about it. They just like in a regular Starbucks, Ron, boom, there's your triple cappuccino, mocha, latte, venti, whatever. I don't remember, so.
You know what image came to mind is the Austin Powers where Dr. Evil has the Starbucks in his evil headquarters.
Yeah, I forgot.
I'm not comparing the CIA to evil headquarters, but just the fact that Starbucks is so like everywhere,
Yeah. Why did we need to bring Starbucks to Iraq? Starbucks and McDonald's.
You don't have them there yet?
I don't know.
No, because they have Seattle's best. It's actually not bad coffee. Sorry. Come on, I went to Green Beans all the time too. You got to go to a Green Beans.
Yeah, Green Beans, Seattle's best, and the Hortons, Tim Hortons.
Oh yeah.
Tim Horton.
The Cinnabon on the base in Tel Afar, my last deployment. Like, we have a Cinnabon, really. Yeah.
Well, no, the worst is the quadrangle in Kandahar.
Oh, I've never been there. Bagram had a pretty good setup too.
Well, not as bad. I mean, they had they had like a Ruby Tuesdays there at Kandahar.
Well, that's where they had the Tim Horton also because the Canadian forces were there, right?
Yeah, I mean there was a lot of NATO people there, and it was, I remember Kandahar way back in the early days, right after like FOB Rhino and things like that. So, but then I went down again, and I never really had to go back. And then I went back in 2013, and I was amazed at the. It was like summer camp, Oh, there's a war on. Oh, shoot! I can't be bothered. I have dinner reservations at Ruby Tuesday. It was hilarious.
Thank you, Alex, for the donation. Thoughts on Army SF Special Forces disbanding SIF teams?
Oh, I'll let Jack answer that one. He wrote a nice article about that, and that was actually well reasoned and thought out. Jack, good job.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah, I did. I wrote an article on my. I wrote it as a blog on my personal website. I figured that was a good place for that.
Wait, and what's your personal website?
JackMurphyWrites.com. And I have some writing and articles and stuff on there, but I wrote kind of just, I guess, an opinion piece on all of that. So apparently the decision is sitting with the Secretary of Defense right now, and I believe what's happening is they are. So let me start it back 1 second. The SIF, also known as the CRF, I think Crisis Response Force. Before that, it was called the Commanders and Extremist Force. Each Special Forces group has one company that had the counter-terrorist hostage rescue mission, specialized in direct action, all that good stuff. They are apparently losing the in extremis portion, at least, of their mission. So all of these units, all of these companies were supposed to be, at least on paper, they were on standby for no-notice deployments anywhere in the world and could ostensibly respond faster being forward deployed. At least some of them are forward deployed in Germany and Okinawa And back in the day, some were the 7th Group 1 was deployed to Panama, but they're stateside now. That was the idea behind it, that they could get there faster than, say, some of the JSOC elements from Fort Bragg or Dam Neck. So apparently the Secretary of Defense is looking at taking away that specific portion of their mission. SF will probably still retain direct action companies, but they'll be out of the hostage rescue business. They will be out of the no notice rapid deployment business. So that's what I think is happening.
And what was the justification behind that?
I think, I'm saying I think because I wrote this as an opinion piece. I don't have all the facts. I think it has to do with a couple of things, but one of them is they never really did that mission.
Right.
I'm not really aware of them ever doing in extremis raids or operations. I mean, I know they've gotten spun up a few times in the past, but I'm not really aware of them ever actually doing that portion of their mission. So that may be the rationale. They look at it and they think we have a duplication of capabilities because the JSOC guys can do this and have done it. But there's probably a lot of other things that go into it. I mean, maybe SF is deciding they want to, really reinvest in unconventional warfare and get away from the direct action side of things. But I don't have all the facts, so I think it remains to shake out and see how.
It's an extremely expensive. I mean, if you're not just doing it in name, if you're actually doing it, it's very expensive to maintain. Because we're not just talking about CQB, close quarter battle. We're talking about hostage rescue, which requires a level of training and precision.
Right.
That is very hard to maintain.
And the other thing too with that, with the in extremis portion of that mission was that the JSOC guys, Ranger Regiment, they have dedicated air assets. So there are airplanes and pilots standing by, and in JSOC's case, I'm sure the real answer is classified, but in the case of the Ranger Regiment, we all know they can be wheels up in 18 hours, right? Having those air assets and those pilots, I mean, without them, you're not doing anything. Right. You're not going anywhere, right? The SIF never had dedicated air assets.
Yeah, they have to fly space.
It's a specific air rating. It's like it's like I think the president has A1A, and I think like the guys like the JSOC guys, it's like 2B2 or B2B. I can't remember the name of the air rating offhand. Maybe you know, Ron. You're the expert here.
Oh no, I'm not. But I can tell you that it's interesting. You talk about ODAs and direct action. Everybody wants to be a door kicker, and it's wonderful to do, but it also never what's the first rule? Never be the first guy through the door, right? So I'm traveling around with these general officers during my stint as COB Bagram, and we're at I can't remember. It's some fob cop that opened and closed so quickly, but there was an ODA there, and the general was talking to conventional guys and the A&A people because, they were always trying to mentor and include the A&A and try to professionalize them as best they could. But the ODA captain sought me out, and he was pissed. He says, "We've been forbidden to go out on unilateral, direct action missions." And I'm going, well, yeah. I mean, aren't you supposed to be taking the A&A guys out? This is all before the commandos, the A&A commandos really took off, and sort of like you're supposed to advise them and let them go do this, get that experience. He says, yeah, but that's what we want to do. That's all we want to do. I go, you're supposed to, develop, I'm trying to go back to the whole FID UW mission thing, and like, I think you forget. You're so caught up in the adrenaline rush of DA missions that you're forgetting your core competency, and I think I tweeted my brief opinion on your commenting on your blog post, Jack, is that I really hope and pray that the regiment does embrace the UW FID mission again, because every time they stand up and tell the national command authorities, the president and the SecDef, why yes, we can go do this raid. I'm sure they all can, and they do it really well, but it's not their core competency. And then they complain that they're exhausted, and then, they have all sorts of other problems with retention and trying to expand into the 4th Battalion in the group,
Right.
the Jedburgh Battalion thing.
Well,
So it's, maybe this is that shot of medicine that they need to focus.
The other challenge with that is, like, when you're talking about hostage rescue, then you're generally talking about sort of a SWAT action, right? You're talking about it. A 12-man team can do that mission in a permissive environment, right? In a permissive environment, they can do a hostage rescue or whatever, or a direct action.
And there were times where they were doing unilateral special forces company level operations.
Really?
Yeah, that happened, and that's not doctrinal. That's not how.
And that's the challenge, is that when you start talking about direct action in a non-permissive environment, when you're talking about JSOC elements, they have they have support, they have security, they have QRFs. They have all these pieces in place that enable them to do these things in a non-permissive environment. It's not just a handful of guys out there on their own with no backup. But I think that SF was putting themselves in these situations because they didn't have those assets. They were
right.
And I'm not saying they can't do it. They're capable. Obviously, they're very capable dudes. It's all the extra stuff that protects those guys that are going in and whatnot.
Right. There was an incident with an ODA. They were in central Afghanistan, and the big thing was then everybody had to grow the big deployment beard, and the thicker the better the beard, the more you would get accepted into your local Harley club when you got back to the States. So they're out doing a patrol in their gun V's, and they're driving around, and unfortunately one of the soldiers gets killed. So Chris Haas is in command of third group. He goes down with the group sergeant major, and a few of us accompany him, and he's interviewing the ODA and trying to figure out, this injury was avoidable. The fatal injury was avoidable. He said, "Why weren't you wearing your Kevlar? Why weren't you wearing your helmets?" And God bless the ODA detachment commander for being honest. He said, "Well, we keep our ball caps on because the chin straps on the helmets ruins our beards." And
Wow.
The sergeant major, who liked to shave his head his every day because I think it made up for what little hair he didn't have, or what hair he didn't have anymore. Anyway, so he looked at Chris Haas and said, "Well, I guess we know what we're going to do now. We're leaving in about an hour. All your beards will be taken off. You will be clean shaven from now on. You will adhere to Army grooming standards, and you will wear your protective headgear as per regulation." And and that went out throughout Siege of Sodef after that, because that sort of thing just was. I mean, if you're going to have a beard, I got it, great, but don't sit there and go and be a fashionista and say, I got to wear my cool guy ball cap, and because I don't want to ruin my beard. So it was
All this talk about beards and ball caps I find rather triggering, Ron. I'm just going to throw that out there right now. But no,
hey, I saw your pictures in your book.
Well, here I am right now, but no, I understand your point. If you need to have,
well, you're talking in a war zone. There's.
Right.
I mean, you have protective gear. I mean, the task force guys in the early days in Iraq used to just wear Protex. The skater snowboarder helmets, the rock climbing helmets, had zero ballistic protection. So they did a couple raids and operators got shot in the head, and the Protec did nothing to slow down the AK-47 round. So that's why they all wear Kevlar now. It's just sometimes it's ego overrides judgment, and that's
right.
It's so. I mean, believe me, I'm all about wearing a ball cap because wearing a helmet. a flight helmet, a Kevlar, a battle helmet, especially with a battery pack and nods on it. Good Lord, I get a sore neck, I get a headache, and plus the, your all your kit and stuff like that you have to wear. It's
I think it's just a question of which rules do you bend, and knowing when to bend them is really what it comes down to.
And some of that is in part experience too, in the sense of, TBI is, and head trauma and stuff like that. What was not it wasn't an issue. It wasn't something people
we didn't really think of it
worried
as
about.
much as we did
prior to Iraq and Afghanistan.
We're still gaining understanding of what causes it and how to treat it and things like that. But you're right. I mean, I remember the early days in Kabul. I mean, good Lord, it was a lot of fun. I mean, we got a couple hours between missions. Hey, let's go down to Chicken Street, which is where they used to have chickens but where all the carpet stores were, and we'd buy carpets. I mean, we'd walk around. I mean, we'd wear a Kevlar and carry our Glocks, but we were just we were mixing with the population, and we were it was it's pretty wild. I mean, fast forward to a year later. I mean, good Lord, I had to write a trip plan and have a 3-vehicle convoy to just go to the airfield from the station. So it was there's a lot. The early days are always the best.
So, Ron, I did want to hear. Is there another question?
Yeah, we got two more real quick. Let's see here. Okay. Thanks, Alex. What are the skills the 10th Infantry learned that separated them from the rest? We only have one mountain division.
Good question.
And we've been in a mountain war for 20 years.
Well, yeah, and of course they're stationed in the flatlands of upstate New York, so it makes a lot of sense.
But you can
thank Senator.
They get the snow, though.
They do get the snow, which is sort of a mountain qualifier, but that's okay. You can thank Bob Dole for that when they brought back his division that he served with in Italy in World War II. That was the compromise position they made to open up Fort Drum and put the 10th Mountain there. They had over a year and a half to prepare for this deployment, and I can speak more to the intel people that Colonel Morrison prepared. He sent a lot of them to Pashto and Dari language schools. He gave them a lot of cultural training and things like that. The different battalions, including the logistics units, which General Frakely operationalized. He made them you're not just going to sit around and do warehouse ops. You guys are actually going to run convoys and be in charge of FOBs and run combat like missions out and about. So they got a lot of training, and they learned the cultural stuff, and and it was an attitude they had a positive attitude towards it. And this was 2006, so they got alerted they got notified sometime in late 2004. I mean, so we're talking the early days. I mean, fast forward now, it's like, hey, we're on the patch chart to go back to, yay.
Well,
so
the units prior to that, you're right. They had the advantage of they were getting all the ARs. They were getting, whereas other units were just kind of dumped there with minimal hookup, first in and stuff like that. They had the advantage of, learning all this stuff, and they had great leadership. They took advantage of that and worked it all up.
I mean, CTAF suffered from poor leadership and poor preparation. I think their combat unit was a brigade out of the 82nd, and I love the 82nd Airborne Division. My son's a platoon sergeant in it. But they're paratroopers, and they constantly want to reenact Normandy and Market Garden, and they want to attack things. And maybe in the early days in Afghanistan, that wasn't the right tactics or operational plan. And of course, the other thing is that we have to keep in mind that as we open up our sight aperture a lot, is that Iraq had begun, And a lot of people weren't quite sure, okay, now that I've got Afghanistan, what do I do with it? I had a conversation with General Frakely once. He was one of the things is when divisions get ready to go do this, or division headquarters, they go do a Washington D.C. They spend about a week in Washington D.C. meeting with all the major interagency units, CIA, NSA, DIA, State Department, so on. He mentioned that he had some meetings at the Pentagon. I said, "Well, did you meet anybody in like an OSD in policy or something like that?" He says, I had like 2 minutes with Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, who didn't even remember that I was going to Afghanistan and didn't even realize that we still had a thing there. So it was kind of, and that's, so they didn't have a lot of top-down guidance about, what is the commander-in-chief's intent, the 4 stars intent from, Combined Forces Command Afghanistan, and ISAF to what do you want? What do you want us to do? What are we running combat operations? Are we, training, mentoring, working side by side with the ANA guys? I mean, what are we doing here? Talk to me. So they got a lot of they suffered from, and if any of them are listening and they want to, yell at me later because I'm wrong, that's good. But from what I gathered, they took what minimal guidance they had and they did the best they could with what they had. So, but the previous unit, like CTAF, like I told you, was they were weak. Their leadership was weak. They weren't really engaged in the mission. I think they were more placeholding.
Interesting. Two more. Ian, yes. And thanks for the donation. And T-Bar, thank you for the donation. Can Ron speak to the situation where it was difficult to decide if a problem set was best suited for the military or the agency?
Good question.
Wow.
And who would make that decision?
Well, it would depend on the type of problem. If it's like in your face tactical problem, who's ever facing it would take care of it. If it's a bigger issue, then we would generally sit down. Either the local OGA chief with the senior military officer in that FOB or battalion commander would fly in or whatever, and they would try to hash it through. If it needed to get elevated, obviously it did, and so it it really depended on the problem and what the issue was. That's kind of hard to answer that hypothetical, but there were issues where in Jalalabad where we had problems with between the base, which moved from one location to Jalalabad Airfield. They moved from in the city to Jalalabad Airfield, and Chris Cavoli and his battalion had already occupied part of the airfield, and the OGA guys, I tried to tell them, I says, hey, these guys are already here, so they're kind of the landlords and they can help you, but again, the officer that was in charge of that, he walked in and says, I'm a Title 50 guy. I don't need to listen to you Title 10 dicks, and you're going to do what I say. So next thing I know, I'm standing in front of Frakely and Terry and Tata, and Chris Cavoli's on the phone. He's a 3-star general. He's commander of U.S. Army Europe, great officer, and he is. And Cavoli's normally even keeled as they come. I mean, he's diplomatic to the core, but Cavoli's pissed. I mean, he did learn a few swear words in Ranger School, and I got to hear them all, and multiple times. He was pissed, and what could I do? I'd sit there and go, I'll look into it. I'll do. But it was eventually we reached an uncomfortable truce. The agency guys just did what the hell they wanted there, and the Army guys just sort of had to suck it up, and it was one of my failures. I always thought, because I wasn't able to ameliorate that situation to make it better, and that was always bad. So left a bad taste in my mouth.
One of the things I did want to follow up on too was you mentioned your second deployment to Bagram, where you were with Admiral Bill McRaven, and you were present when the the Maersk was hijacked.
Right, the Maersk, Alabama, the container ship. Right. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was there working with the task force on something else, and the JSOC commander back then, McChrystal started it. They would alternate between Iraq and Afghanistan, where they would have their flag. McChrystal, of course, spent 99% of his time in Iraq. McRaven was more even-handed about that. So he's there, and we're working this project, which is never mind, and it's just.
What was that?
No, I can't talk about it. Yeah, I can't talk about it. So it was just one of those things you kind of roll your eyes, going, is that like the Mike Bloomberg math? Everybody gets $1 million kind of somebody thought of it like that. It's like, oh my God. So, but so the Maersk, Alabama happens, and so McRaven's got most of his staff there. So there's a lot of VTCs back to Fort Bragg, back to JSOC, to the Pentagon, to the White House, and other players. And so McRaven's back and forth. And a lot of times he'd have to kick us out of the room because he would have to talk one-on-one with the National Security Advisor and sometimes even the president.
Oh.
So, and then afterwards he would give us a little what his guidance was. Excuse me. So anyway, so he finally gives the go, and you gotta love JSOC. They seem to have this unlimited video budget. I mean, would make Hollywood jealous, because we get to watch the free fall drop of the boat drivers, of the SWIC guys.
Yeah.
Well, the boats, the SWIC drivers, and the SEALs, and they're all flying. And so we have a camera bird. I'm going, this is great. This is like a Howard Hughes production, of Hell's Angels. I'm watching all this. It's like, and you can I'm even talking with my hands now again. This is bad. I'm going to need more scotch after this. So anyway, and we watch them all fall into the ocean. I mean, plop, plop, plop. And then the video cuts out. And maybe, 20, 30 minutes later, a video cuts in again, and on one of the Navy vessels, one of the ships, that is going to be the command post for the SEALs that dropped in. And so there's Scotty Moore, who I've known on and off for years. He's the captain of this, and he's got that brown GI towel, and he's drying his hair like he just came out of a gym workout. He's gone on a nondescript Nomex green flight suit, and he's going, "Sir, we're ready to go. Execute right now. I got my guys ready. We're gonna go right now." And McRaven goes, Scotty, calm down. Let's take it slow. Let's think about this. And I don't know. Scotty was always very, very aggressive, and so I mean, but it was funny. So from there on, we were always like Big Brother, looking over the shoulders of the SEALs there on the scene about what was going on, and we were hooked into all the comms and things like that. So it was interesting and kind of weird at the same time, because occasionally McRaven would click the talk button and ask a question or and thanks for your donation, Tate, and things like that. Go type. But no, I'm serious. But he would ask a question, and here's a 3-star, sort of interfering with the tactical commander's control of his battle space. Yeah. It was just kind of interesting. And then of course when you watch the Tom Hanks movie, you see it from a different perspective, and you go, okay. But it was just interesting just to watch McRaven's the way he commanded and leadered his through that crisis, with not so much with his subordinate units, because that was all good, but with negotiating with the White House, because there were numerous plans being proposed from the beginning of the crisis till the one that was accepted and was executed. So he would always come back with additional planning guidance, or like the White House is worried about casualties, or it was the Obama administration. They wanted ironclad guarantees on everything, and
right.
McRaven, did his best to assuage those concerns. So I thought he the thing is, what I learned there was that he not only had to manage the crisis and lead his subordinate units and people and coordinate their resources and come up with a plan, but he had to manage the expectations of the civilian leadership in Washington,
Right.
And that may have been the more difficult challenge of them all. And that was, I always admired him for that.
Was that because President Obama and the National Security Council really had like this expectation that it was all going to be nice, clean headshots on the bad guys and ticker tape parade for the hostages coming home? I mean, that must have been very difficult for Admiral McRaven and for the guys working the ground game to make those kinds of promises.
I don't know. I think that's what it was. The way McRaven would intimate the gist of the conversations that he would have, they wanted those ironclad guarantees that it was either going to be surgical, clean, and there was no chance of any oopses or anything like that. But he like I said, he had to guide them to the reality of where he had to keep them. So it was is probably his biggest leadership challenge, I think, at that time.
And how, from your perspective, where you said, how did that operation actually shake out? The details, at least we learned, were pretty interesting as far as how they executed. A well-executed operation, without a doubt.
Oh, it was. The good thing was, he knew all the players, all the senior players, because it was, the damn neck guys were coming out to do it. So he knew all the personalities. He knew their capabilities. It wasn't like he was, tasking the Ranger Regiment to do something, and he'd have to look around for his Ranger expert to let him know what was what. But I think it was the plan. Of course, always starts big, with lots of explosions and lots of assets and lots of bullets flying, and then it goes through all sorts of branches and sequels and twigs and things like that, and it finally distills down to what they actually could get away with, because they wanted to keep the footprint small and everything like that. I'm going, really, these 3-4 starving Somali pirates, they took 3 Navy ships, and the C-17s had to fly, to drop the boats and everything. It was
required a decision
pretty intense.
From the White House to decide how to deal with 3 or 4 starving Somalian pirates. That's really interesting.
Right. Yeah, because I remember my son would tell me war stories between his time in the Navy and the Army, when he was on a Navy frigate doing anti-piracy patrols in the Gulf of Yemen and Arabian Gulf, Arabian Sea area there, and things like that, and talking about interdicting these dhows, the small. Oh no, we're fishermen. These aren't AK-47s, really. You don't see anything. So it was, they had some fun. But it was, as you say, it was amazing because the vessel had returned to control of the crew. So the vessel, it was just the Captain Phillips was the only one that was endangered or being held hostage. But it could almost goes back to your discussion and your reasoning on the abolishment of the CIF or the CRIF, is they had all the resources to achieve this multi-dimensional, multi-domain, maritime, anti-piracy, hostage rescue, whatever type thing. So it was.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because Andy Milburn, you talked about that. The idea of leading up. Dealing with leadership above you, and I feel as though since sort of Clinton's like zero failure, or what was it, like this idea that if you make a mistake in the military or something goes bad on your watch, zero defect, the whole zero defect idea. Yeah, that you make a mistake in the military, you're out, you're done, especially if you're an officer or whatever.
Even during the Carter administration, they were freaking out that the Delta guys were going to kill Iranians when they went into the embassy and rescued our hostages. I mean, there were stories that like he was suggesting, shoot the terrorists in the shoulder, and Charlie Beckwith was like, "Hey, that's not how it works."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have the same problem with our police force, and I have this theory about the Lone Ranger. That I mean, most people now didn't grow up with that, didn't see it, but it carries on with the idea that like the Lone Ranger never killed anybody, right? We grew up with this hero who can shoot the gun out of people's hands.
Like Batman can throw some batarangs.
Right. And that's what a good guy is capable of, right? A good guy is capable of taking down a bad guy through superior skill and not actually having to harm the bad guy. So now we have this sort of idea in our culture that, if somebody's rushing a police officer with a knife, that they can either maybe not shoot the knife out of his hand, but shoot him in the leg. They can shoot him in the leg.
Walker, Texas Ranger, roundhouse kick.
Yeah, exactly.
Hand, yeah.
And because that's how good guys win. Good guys don't have to kill people.
That's right, because Chuck Norris will show me how.
Yeah,
that's right. Well, it's interesting because one of the questions I had in one of my leadership classes was we talked about this sort of thing, and I said, when George Marshall was the chief of staff of the Army to FDR, he was pretty open. He says we're gonna, he didn't mince words. He was straightforward. He told the president, "You're going to expect casualties. This is going to happen. This is the bad. This is the good." And I asked the question with that preface to my leadership class. I says, do we have leaders now in the military or in the intelligence agencies that are willing to be that forthright to the decision makers to say that? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I did graduate from the course, but it was only by the hair on my. It's like because I was not supposed to ask the impolite questions, and it was something I observed that I always you try to see. I've seen way too many political generals and obviously politicians in the agency and in elsewhere, but it was it was. But anyways, the three generals I mentioned from 10th Mountain, as well as Ed Reeder and Chris Haas, they were pretty forthright and honest. I observed them when they talked to the CODELs or the congressional delegations or the visiting staffers, who were even more terrifying than the congressmen and senators, because they really do have the power of telling the senator or the congressman this is what you need to know type of thing. They were pretty forthright and honest, and so we had some interesting discussions with them. They were like, well, that's not what we've heard elsewhere. So I said, well, this is the truth as we see it from our vantage point, where we sit here in Afghanistan. If back in DC, everything looks different.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we could talk all night again. I really only had like one other big question to ask. Is there anything else?
No, I just want to thank Graham. Graham, thank you for the donation. He didn't ask a question. Actually, he did a little bit further down. He wanted to ask Ron if you knew Doug Lau, Laux, at all, or if he has any thoughts on his book Left of Boom about counter IED work in Afghanistan.
I do not know that gentleman, and I have not read that book. I worked with some of the counter IED people in that were associated with 10th Mountain. There was an interesting. Again, it was a nascent effort back then because the IED threat was just beginning to really come to the forefront in Afghanistan, of course, then later in Iraq even more so, and also with the explosive form penetrators in Iraq, and then of course the whole joint IED JIADO came so yeah, the contractor money hole in DC, the thing was the IED guys, the counter IED guys in Afghanistan in 2006, we had the the clue and the couple of the other electron systems to try to pre-detonate, and we emphasize the tactics, techniques, and procedures about when you come to culverts and bridges, you stop and you do the probing, and all the stuff that, so you move at the pace of snail going to your objective. Some of the ID guys that would go out and do the ID exploitation to discover, because like bomb makers leave fingerprints, they leave, everybody has a signature, like this guy does like a 3-twist on his wire type of thing or whatever, but they tried to form themselves into an action arm, so they were like an IED QRF. They would go out and do raids, and so I think that lasted for about 3 seconds. And the poor colonel, that was it was one of those wet dreams he had, and it was kind of fun to see him get chopped down to size in front of everybody, because he would lord this over everybody, and General Frakely knocked that out of the park. That was funny, but. Because he was also interfering with other operations elsewhere, so it was, he was the most important guy in country.
Sure. And Alex just asked, favorite memory of working with State Department DSS. Any plans to have Cody Perrin on the show? And when will you have Oops All CIA Edition episode?
I'm practically asking us to play like strip poker right here.
Hey.
Pros in here. Yeah, I mean, that might be a little bit much.
No strip poker on this end.
Yeah.
I live near Deadwood, South Dakota. I'll hold a Bill Hickok hand. But I do have a DSS vignette. So Khalil Azad, the current special ambassador that's negotiated this agreement with the Taliban, during the first Bush administration, he was like the senior special dude for Afghanistan for the Bush administration before he became appointed ambassador there and everything like that. So he flies in on an aircraft, not one of ours, and there's his DSS team, and I'd never met these guys before, but you could tell right away these guys were good. They knew what was going on, and the DSS, the team chief, come up and met me, because we didn't have a whole lot. This was that first tour when we were like pulling triple duties on everything, and I gave him the 411, and they had their little Suburban. They went and drove to the embassy, and a little while later, he calls me up on my little cell phone that it's remarkable. We had cell phones in those early days there in Afghanistan. And he says he'd lost Khalil Azad. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, I need your help finding him. He just walked out of the embassy, and he's walking around town. I says, he didn't tell you guys this, or he doesn't have anybody with him? No, he just has his aide, and I met his aide when they'd gotten off the plane. His aide, very reminded me of like Beaker from the Muppets, very officious little guy, and sorry, I don't know how else to describe, but he comes up and says, because they called him an ambassador, so he says the ambassador needs to use the facilities. So can you point out where the business class lounge is? Now this is Kabul Airport. I mean, I've got eroding earth revetments around me. I've got acres and acres of destroyed Russian aircraft that have been pushed off into a minefield that are waiting to be scrapped or pulled out and then demined and everything. I'm talking the craters of the moon. I mean, you're lucky the tarmac's in one piece, but we're surrounded by this earthen berm. And I look at the A and I go, well, there's the berm. You knock yourself out, pee anywhere you want. And he just looked at me like he was shocked. And, oh God, this is the ambassador. I go, this is Afghanistan.
Yeah.
He ought to be used to this. Knock it off.
Shit. Enjoy the suck.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we mobilized a bunch of some of our other guys, and we went out with the DSS guys, and we found him, and he was mad because he was getting to know the man on the street stuff. I'm going, okay, whatever. I mean, if something had happened to you, it would have really looked bad. But I love those DSS guys. they seem to be very focused on their job and very professional. So a lot of respects for them.
And any plans for Cody Perron?
Cody Perron. Oh yeah, I interviewed Cody once before. No plans right now, but we can arrange that in the future.
Yeah.
We're like scheduled like right now, like 6 weeks out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have our like list of potential people that I'd like to reach out to is pretty long. So no promises about doing it, in a timely manner, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we're almost two. We just got booked one for June, so we're very forward planning right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the next 6 weeks are solid. Yeah. And then after that, we'll start lining some other people up. And I got to talk to you off air about some other interesting folks that will, I think be interested.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. And actually, that brings us to the next episode, next Friday. And that's what I wanted to ask Ron about. So, Ron, next episode, we're going to have Michael Ames on. He's going to be here in studio. He's the guy, he wrote the book. I know you know this, but for our viewers, he wrote the book American Cipher about Bo Bergdahl, how he wandered off the base, how he got captured, his captivity. I'm about halfway through reading the book. And so I'm asking this question to you, Ron, not to start a food fight, not to instigate anything, but really I just want to have to develop some interesting conversation points as we roll into the next episode next Friday. What questions do you think I should ask Michael? Or what questions do you think Michael should be asking people like you?
Well, when I heard the book was coming out, and I got it and I read it, and I reached out to Michael, and he never interviewed me, and he didn't seem to interview. And Michael and I've had this discussion, so this is like round 6 of the food fight, so no worries.
No, I don't need to kick anything up.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, it's all done in a very, mature manner. I mean, there's no name calling or anything like that, but it's just a disagreement about research methodologies and that sort of thing. But it seemed like the people he interviewed were confirming the conclusions that he'd already made. And when I spoke to him about what we just talked about in the last episode, the last broadcast I was on, about the wandering off, the thing in his book, he either ignored it or discounted it, and plus he got some basic facts of the agency wrong, and so it was. Oh, come on, Dave, you can have a little more. And it was, I guess part of me was miffed, insulted, because he hadn't reached out to me to get an alternate theory to the crime. He and a couple of the people that he interviewed for sources, they attacked me on Twitter and everything. It was like,
oh really?
Yeah, okay. I was whatever. I was like, Twitter's like the playground with chains and knives. It's not a big to do. It's whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't block people. I just mute them. Because talk to the hand. I can't. I mean, but Michael was. He seemed to want to do better, but the book was already out and everything like that. And I guess my primary objection to the thread throughout the whole book was he made Bo Bergdahl somehow the poster child for the entire failed Afghan adventure, in to kind of paraphrase his words. And I thought that was not he probably could have chose a better somebody better to use that for an example. I talked to my son at the 82nd. Now I realized Bergdahl was at the airborne unit up at Fort Richardson, Alaska. But I mean none of them thought he was a good soldier. I mean, there's some people that have moved into my son's unit from that unit, and they have nothing. I mean, Bergdahl's the kind of guy that if you had enough time, you would have probably chaptered him out of your unit because he was just a poor performer. And so it was, again, I think he put too much emphasis on Bo's character and making him out to be some sort of misunderstood, innocent child of the evil military-industrial complex or something like that. Michael, I'm sure you're listening, and you're probably getting ready to send me a bomb or something like that. And I'll listen, and I just found it interesting that his research I thought was flawed. So bottom line.
I like I said, I'm halfway through the book. I'll finish it before we have Michael here next week. But I mean, I think what really comes through, at least in what I've read thus far, is like you said, Bo Bergdahl is somebody who never should have been in the Army to begin with, and he is. I think you'll see when we talk to Michael also, Dave. Bo Bergdahl is that guy. Like, you knew him when you went through basic training. I knew him when I went through basic training. There's that one kid where it's like, dude, what are you doing here? Like, how did you even get this far? Like, you should not be here. You're not mentally well. You're not in a good place. And
I had to join up before I got drafted.
Well, in his case, he wanted to join. It's an interesting personality. It's like the over earnest, like I'm going to be like a samurai warrior kind of guy, but has delusions of grandeur.
Sure.
Like his mind is like he's in a very alternate universe. And when you understand his upbringing, I think it begins to explain a little bit of that, but still.
It does.
Yeah.
I would hate to have been his platoon sergeant or his team leader, his squad leader, because God, I would have, the kid would have been in the woodline doing burpees from sun up to sundown, just because.
Yeah, and I had a guy in my platoon in Iraq that was like that, and I did have him doing ground drills in the gravel until someone made me stop.
Yeah,
that's a whole other story I've told in my book. But there are those people who they shouldn't be there.
Anything's against the law.
And one of the challenges, I don't know how it is now, but for a while it was very difficult to chapter people out. They would be considered leadership challenges, and instead of like, okay, look, you're done, and they would move them to another unit.
And came in during the surge when they were just taking anything.
Yeah, they would move them because like, okay, well, he's a leadership challenge. Obviously, his team leader and his squad leader are failing him.
Right.
So let's move him somewhere else where he can flourish. Right. And I don't know if that's what happened to him, but that was the mentality.
Yeah, but Bo was not going to flourish in the military. Yeah, that just wasn't going to happen.
There's a good job in the gym to hand out towels, dude. Go there.
Exactly.
What were people? What were some of the specific, or why were people attacking you? Simply because you questioned the research methods, or for other reasons?
Well, I'm trying to remember. I mean, it's like one of those things. They didn't approve. They were sort of defending Michael because I like I said, you didn't interview me. You interviewed people that were really on the outside. You didn't interview General Scaparrotti. You didn't interview, any of the real players involved. You had it's like a bad investigator. I know you're guilty, Dave. And now I'm gonna find evidence that proves that.
Yeah.
And it's instead of follow the evidence where it leads, instead of Michael saying I want to know what this whole Bo Bergdahl thing. He decided, I think early on, that Bo Bergdahl was innocent,
victim of the system.
Right. This is, he was going to be my poster boy, my symbology through this tale. I'm going to weave this tale using Bo as my protagonist to show how bad the entire Afghan program, strategies, adventure, whatever phrase you want to use it.
That I would disagree with. That I don't know, or I would agree with you that I don't think Bo is the lens through which you can view the war in Afghanistan. That would be
right.
That would be a bad take, as the kids say.
Yeah, so I did not write a review on Amazon on Michael's book or anything like that. I let it go. I figure I just like whatever, it's like,
well, and this isn't about poisoning the well for next week. Like
it's the point. I want to get to the truth of it. So, and that's why I ask different people and try to generate some of these different thoughts on it and see what comes out of that.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, again, I'm multi-people removed because when I relayed, the NCIS agents debriefed us and what they discovered and what was in their report. And I mean, to find the truth, you'd have to interview some of his platoon mates and things like that. And I think they've been on enough media, when Bergdahl got released that, their feelings are pretty well known. And so it's like, it's a controversial subject and Bo's, hopefully Bo's made peace with himself and he's faded away into the woodwork somewhere. So, I mean, the interesting thing is I wonder if him and his family, his father and mother have actually reconciled. I'm not sure they have. There's been some debate on that. He didn't go home, or he didn't go back to them, or something like that. So it's interesting question you could ask.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, Dave, you got anything else? Because I know we could go on all night.
We could. Are we going to do a members only segment?
Do you want to? Do you have? You think you got something else you want to lay on us? That.
Well, we can talk about the corn gall.
Okay, that sounds like a plan to me.
Corn gall Valley.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Well, guys.
Not nice.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us
guys
live tonight, watching the show, asking questions, and participating. Really appreciate it. We've been here, with Ron for about 2.5 hours, more than 2.5 hours. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please hit that bell icon so you get notified. Give this video a little thumbs up. Write some comments. All that helps bump up the video in YouTube's algorithm and gets more eyeballs on it. We really appreciate it. And if you go down in the description, you'll find a link to the first interview we did with Ron a few episodes back. And some of the other people we mentioned tonight: CIA Ops Officer H.K. Roy, UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter. Who were some of the other ones we mentioned in this? We mentioned Andy Milburn, SOTF commander, fighting ISIS in Mosul. I mean, a whole bunch of cool interviews in there that kind of reference and factor into this interview we have been doing.
We mentioned, J.T. Patton, we didn't really mention him, but the price of giraffes on the open market. And the thing that people have to understand is like all these interviews and all these personalities are all intertwined with one another, whether they know it or not. Right.
So it's very interesting to look at it, as a gestalt. That's my $6 million word for
nice.
Tonight.
A gestalt.
Ooh. That Columbia education wasn't wasted.
There you go.
A part of the greater whole. I like it.
That's GI Bill paying off right there. And also down in the description is a link to our Patreon if you want to support the stream. We really appreciate it. Go take a look at that. And I don't know, that's it. Ron, do you got anything else that you want to plug while we're here? You mentioned you give leadership courses. I mean, how can people find you out there?
Oh no, I'm a student. I don't give anything. Gosh, no, I don't. I'm a quiet country retired gentleman now.
You've got something to offer, Ron. Don't sell yourself short. But what's your Twitter handle so people can find you on Twitter?
Oh, it's what is it? Ronald J. Moeller. It's just my name, my full name with my middle initial, Moeller. Yeah. So, and there's a picture of me kneeling in front of the Peshawar Air Base sign. So it's me.
And I'm Jack Murphy, RGR on Twitter. Dave.
I don't know. I'm
Jesus Christ, Dave. I don't know. It's so embarrassing.
He's on Twitter so much.
Find me on Twitter, and you'll find Dave through me. Okay, I mean that's the best we can do.
Yeah.
God damn it.
Also, speaking of social media, we do have a subreddit. We have a subreddit, the Team House.
Also down in the description, you'll find it.
Also down. I think it's Alex, right, has done a really good job of setting that up. It's not super active. If you guys get active on there, we'll get active on there in the sense of if there's questions or input or feedback. Jack and I both check it out. So we don't want you to think that we're never there. We don't look at it, because we do. And that's about it. Thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you, Ron. Thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, and we will.
You're very welcome.
We'll do the bonus segment now, and that'll be up on Patreon later this week.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
All right. Ciao.